serious? Late night hikers, what is the creepiest thing you have seen while hiking? I once shined my headlamp on a man masturbating next to a juniper tree when I was going out for a pooper by the juniper tree. My repost from a different AskReddit post a while ago wasn't so much hiking, but it was late at night. I was walking around my neighborhood alone once, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was this little pond near my house, with a wooded area that had trees, a bench and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the stars and I heard some rustling off to my right, towards the trees. Bears were not uncommon where I'm from, so I took out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. It freaked me out, so I kept my flashlight on and my senses aware. But I stayed on the bench to mull over my thoughts and watch the sky some more. I don't know why I did that, cause that's typical horror movie it. Anyway, a few minutes pass and I hear nothing more, so I lean back into the bench and start to relax a bit. I'm staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed downwards, so as not to create any light pollution, when I notice something in the tree in my peripheral vision. I couldn't tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly, and the rustling noise was back too. I immediately sat up and stared at it, but hadn't shone my flashlight at it yet in case of pissing off some huge bird or something else. I don't think I've ever been that scared. I remember my heart was beating so fast and I could taste blood. I stared at it for what seemed like forever, and it slowly stopped moving, but the shape was still there. Bears do climb trees sometimes, so I was hesitant to run away in case that's what it was, so I just kept staring at it. After a while I mustered up the little raisin-ass cojones to shine my goddamn light at the tree. It was a man, a ducking man, in the tree, crouched in the tree like some silent, naked monkey. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes were open really wide. When my light landed on him he started to move like he was going to come down, but I didn't stick around to see if he did. I jumped the bench and ran for the ducking hills. I ran to my house and around to the back door and locked myself in without looking back once. I went around and made sure every window and door was locked. I even checked the attic. I never go out alone anymore. Edit. I did call the cops but they didn't find him and nothing came from it. I was hella paranoid for months after that, and started carrying pocket knives and or pepper spray whenever I went out at night, even if I wasn't alone. Be safe, my dudes. Edit 2. Fixed opposing tenses. Edit 3. Thanks to all the lovely lads in the comments. I've concluded that this was, in fact, a crackhead and I happened to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still don't recommend going out alone or unarmed at night, though. Be safe, please. Edit 4. I just woke up and holy it, I didn't expect this to blow up. Thanks for my first silver. Edit 5. Never mind, I guess he was a leprechaun on crack. Not on a trail but walking my dog late at night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. My dog rang her bell and I begrudgingly got up to take her outside. When she wants to pee in the middle of the night I don't take her very far, just in our side yard. I took a flashlight with me in case she decided to poo so I could pick it up. I'm standing there waiting for her to do her thing. She is doing the doggy walk in a circle thing. Then all of a sudden the dog gets spooked and whips around. Out of the corner of my eye I see this chick just standing there. I didn't see her walk up. I didn't hear her walk up. I just see her standing there super still. Based on her position, she had to have come from between my house and my neighbor's house, which is odd, because behind our house is back up to a green belt. It is probably 40 degrees outside and this lady, about 20, is in super short shorts and a t-shirt. I looked at her, told her she scared me, and she mumbled something like, "Nice night, what are you up to?" Standing there holding the leash with my dog. I said, "I'm walking my dog." Then she said, "Cool, cool, do you know how to get into my house?" I locked myself out, pointing to my neighbor's house. Now, I'm a good American. I know my neighbors, and this wasn't my neighbor, who is a single 30-year-old female. She hangs out with my wife, so I know her really well. So I asked her, "That house?" pointing directly at my neighbor's house. She nodded. I said, "You don't live there." "I know who lives there." She just scoffed and wandered her way into my backyard. I followed her, said, "What the hell are you doing?" She then took off running. Scaled my fence. Which item of note? It isn't an easy fence to scale. It is a deer fence. It is a see-through fence that goes up 3 feet with cattle gate. Then the top of the fence is stainless steel wire that runs horizontally. It is the type of thing that, if you weren't expecting it, you'd easily trip over as it is extremely hard to see and not very common. Anyways, she scales the fence and ran away into the green belt. I always have a pocket knife on me and was fortunate enough to have my, unfortunately, useless dog. So I looked around my house, neighbor's house for other people, shined my light in the green belt, and nothing. I have no idea how she wound up back there, what she was doing, what she intended to do, but she scared the ever-living it out of me. Edit. Green belt, unincorporated land, zone to never have anything built on it, i.e., backing up to the edge of a forest, cliff, etc. In my case it was a wooded area for about 1 stroke to a mile of nothing. Rattlesnakes, deer, mongooses, etc. live in that green belt. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold. As an astute Redditor pointed out, mongooses and rattlesnakes don't coexist in any region in the world. It is Texas and I've seen crazy stuff back there. Possums, roadrunners, owls, coyotes, bobcats, deer, regularly. Lots of snakes, skunks, etc. I am not an expert on local fauna, so I guess Rikki Tikki Tavi doesn't live back there. I just know there are tons of thorns and assorted shrubbery that make it an awful place to chill. Common questions. Was she hot? In a different context, maybe. As a creeper chick leaping deer fences like Jason Bourne? No. Is my neighbor a lesbian looking for strange? No. She isn't a lesbian. Was it a meth head? This is my best guess. It was late and she had the leaping abilities of a kangaroo. Picture of fence. It is kind of hard to explain, but if you see those wires that go all the way across, it is made to keep deer from jumping. But it also makes it a super easy thing to trip on, especially in the dead of night. It was in the summer around dusk and I was camping at a remote campground with my dad. There was a lake right next to the grounds and my dad and I would trail blase through the forest right next to the lake because if you went far enough there was a really pretty waterfall. A few strange things happened on this hike. We found a slash pile that had a little kid's shoe on top. When we came to a small clearing, my dad had to take a leak to he faced one side of the clearing and I faced the other and we both clearly heard a child say, "I'm over here." My dad thought it was me, and when he realized it wasn't, we spent half an hour looking for someone, but we found nobody. After that, we gave up on going to the waterfall and started to make our way back to camp. But there were clear sounds of something following us, twigs snapping, bushes shaking. We haven't been camping there since. Not so much hiking as walking home after work one night a lot of years ago. I normally got off around 7 PM and my walks home were uneventful. However, this night I covered a half shift for someone and worked until 11 PM. There was a trail behind some train tracks I would take home to avoid walking beside traffic and whatnot. I came to realize that night those trails were a lot different at 11 PM than they were at 7 PM. I happened across a guy who was laying by his bike moaning in pain. It didn't sound like real moaning, more like a kid's fake "I have a tummy ache and can't go to school" moan. I also noticed his bike was standing up on its kickstand. It didn't make sense to me he would set his bike up properly only to fall to the ground in pain. He saw me and called out to me for help, but I kept walking and turned to make my way back up towards the street. As I turn, I suddenly hear some shuffling around and the previously hurt gentleman yells at me, "I'm gonna kill you, Methodica." He hops on his bike and starts rushing towards me. At this point, I'm most of the way up the incline going towards the railroad tracks that ran parallel to the street. I haul ass up there and as I get over the tracks, my would-be assailant proceeds to hit the tracks with his front tire and flips over his handlebars, hitting the ground hard. He is now moaning in pain for real and makes genuine calls for help. I used a payphone at a gas station to call the cops and explain what happened. They get there and the officer explains to me this guy's a village idiot who does this to rob people. And it's not the first time they had to pick his ass up after he biffed on a bike trying to rob someone. I told the officer he threatened to kill me and he laughed. Dude wasn't even armed, and apparently has had his ass kicked more times than he can count using that little line of his. Not hiking so much as car camping. But we were way the duck out there in the middle of nowhere on BLM land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating dinner, cleaned up. It was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front right tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent very quickly that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking. Scary to watch spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a gun. So we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us and got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing there was some person, probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day. Edit. Well, this blew up. To answer some questions, this was south of Gypsum, and it was 100% not private land. This was a marked Forest Service road in an area with dispersed camping I had visited several times before. There were 3 guys and 5 girls. The guys were all together cooking the whole time leading up to us discovering the tires being slashed. These people are my best friends, and this would be wildly uncharacteristic of any of them. For those wondering how we didn't hear it, our cars were parked 30 yards away from our fire tents, and a car coming down a road is easy to pick out from the sounds of nature. A gentle hissing gets lost in the wind. We heard it as soon as we started walking up. The tires were slashed on the exact same spot on the side wall. It would be almost impossible for something on the road to puncture the tires like that. Also, there was no cell service. We called the cops and ranger as soon as we got back to the highway. Told them exactly what FS road we were on and gave them coordinates. But there isn't a lot for them to do. Cop told us it was good we were packing and to be careful out there. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often, so I've seen a few things. The creepiest though happened about 2 months ago. I left the house around 1:30 am, and it started off as a normal walk. I wandered around the town till about 2 am. When I decided to go home, I was walking back the route I had came when I noticed a black van meander down the street. Didn't really pay too much attention to it though. At first, I did pay attention though when I saw it slowly drive by me for a second time. I wasn't entirely sure it was the same van though, so I just continued walking. But this time I kept an eye out, and lo and ducking behold, about 10 minutes later, the same damn black van came down the street again. This time I knew for sure because it didn't have license plates. Now I was fairly scared, so I picked my pace up a little bit. When the van came around again this time, it stopped in the middle of the road a few houses in front of me. I stopped, turned around, and booked it back in the other direction. I made a few turns onto different roads, and then ran right into someone's yard. I waited behind their fence, and the same ducking van came down the street. I assume that when they couldn't find me, they finally decided to duck off. But I waited in that yard for about 20 minutes before I ran back to my house and practically threw myself through my bedroom window. Edit. UJ3K, it isn't letting me respond to your comment lol. But I'm more of an insomniac Ely. Edit 2. Because this is like the most asked question. Yes, I am a guy. Also told to put in here that I was 15 when it happened. I'm copying and pasting this over from an older AskReddit post which asked a similar question. I used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a relatively large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. Anyway, I think this was roughly like the 3rd or 4th time we were out there camping. My friend had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we definitely think she did anyway. The next morning we found her boots, a few clothes, and all her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured that it could have been completely feasible that she misplaced it. Although we were quite sure that they were next to her tent, we didn't really want to believe that they were stolen. Anyway, we didn't read too much into this and just stupidly said to ourselves that perhaps she had left it by the boulders and some animal took an interest to it. I know it sounds stupid, but it was very reasonable to us at the time. Anyway, fast forward a year. We're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's pitch black out, and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for a slash, and what do I see? A dude in a full-on ghillie suit laying on his stomach looking right towards our campsite. I kinda stood there frozen as this dude clocks that I've seen him, and he just bolts it out of there. I don't know whether the event to the year prior was related to the ghillie guy, but this definitely has stuck to all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is a damn shame. Years ago, before we got married, my wife and I went to a local state park with a picnic and a hammock. We set the hammock up in the woods, enjoyed our picnic, then fell asleep together in the hammock. I was abruptly awakened by my wife. She motioned for me to be quiet. The sun had set, there was still a hint of light in the sky, but we couldn't see anything meaningful in the woods. My wife beckoned me to listen. Complete silence. Then, the snap of a branch. In the distance, more silence. We were both suddenly very on edge. We whispered to one another, trying to figure out if someone was sneaking up on us. The silence was broken again. Another branch. Same direction but closer. Then, from another direction, a momentary crunch of leaves. Now, we were terrified. We both had pocket knives on us. Small but better than nothing. We also had a flashlight. We drew our knives and deliberated whether whatever was out there knew our location. We decided to keep the light off, lest we give away our exact location. Maybe we could run for the car. More steps, in rapid succession, coming directly toward us. Then silence again. My wife had enough. "We know you duckers are out there," she yelled. Silence for an eternity, and then another crunch of leaves. We had enough. We prepared ourselves as best we could for a fight, then shined the flashlight into the darkness. Toward the last noise we had heard. 3 deer scampered away into the darkness. We sheepishly gathered our things and left without incident. When my now wife and I first started dating, we would take long walks through our very small town after I got off work at 11 PM. We would wander through the cemetery, down little country roads, everywhere. But our favorite area was a large field where the stars were incredible. One night we were watching a small meteor shower and heard all kinds of loud grunting and ruckus coming from a tree line. We had nowhere to go and were starting to get concerned. A large, angry buck came out, stared at us, and then quietly walked away. I don't think we breathed for several minutes. I was convinced he was coming at us and there was no way to outrun him. We didn't go back there for a few days. I go hiking in the woods that permeate my town. Sometimes so late that I get to see the sunrise out there. The strangest thing I ever saw was what I could only describe as a shanty town was built up seemingly overnight deep into the woods. Simple little hovels made of scrap metal and bedsheets and a small fire pit that someone had made out of an old tire, with the fire still burning. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that this was well past midnight when I found this place and it was quiet as a grave. There was no one there. Someone made the trouble of getting a fire going and then left it. From the look of it, this place could hold about a dozen or so people, and yet there was nothing there but the fire they abandoned and whatever possessions they had left in the shanties. Usually, it's what I hear. Large, fallen branches snapping just out of sight of my headlamp. Or waking up an hour later and hearing steps and leaves rustling. But too exhausted and fearful to inspect or want to know. Probably nothing important anyway. One time I returned to my car after a late night hike with friends and my SUV was covered in foot and paw prints. They were just so large and even dragged a little in the dust. It was on near a large military base in the mountains. I think some local enlisted may have made them to scare us. But it was just so well done. Pretty scary for all of us because it's what you'd imagine the Blair Witch would do. No animal did it. Probably too late for this thread, but I love telling this story because it's just so bizarre, so here we go. When I was very little, like 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. Now, my dad is sort of a combo Irish bloke plus Yorkshire laddie type of fellow and very spry, despite his being about 55 at the time. And on this particular occasion had decided we were going to go hiking way up into the cliffs. I was quite happy with this development as it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult bits. This was a proper trek. He wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling sea. But after we reached the top plains, where it's all short, wind-whipped grass and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. When you're small, your parents are God, so seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with. So I was pulling on his arm and going, What? My mum is epileptic and I saw her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too. Or something similar. And I wouldn't know what to do because we're up on this huge cliff and no one is around. When just as fast as he started it, he snapped out of it. Fireman lifted me right up and just started striding away without a word. Over his shoulder, I could see a big, pale yellow object stuck into the ground like an obelisk. I know now that it was a refrigerator. When I was older and I asked my dad about it, he stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 50s, he and his little friends had found an old style fridge in the woods, and being little boys, they opened it. Well, of course, they had found a body, another child, who by whichever means had found themselves in the fridge and unable to get out. My dad has never mentioned a gender, which leads me to believe he either witnessed a very decomposed or skeletonized individual. But I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD and it turns out he found a dead body when he was a teenager? My dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time we saw that episode and had excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. My dad has seen some gnarly yet, but for whatever reason he will not discuss anything further about this dead child in the fridge. Only that it happened. So when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma and I said something like, "Oh dad, that's awful. So when you saw the fridge up there, it brought up the old memories?" And he honestly looked at me with his big blue eyes like I was an idiot. I'll never forget it. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone. "It was because it was the same fridge." More than clarification edit. I was a little girl, so there was no chance my dad was going to open the fridge while I was right there and also possibly relive the experience of seeing whatever a mummified corpse inside a fridge looks like. No, I don't believe it was the same fridge. It literally would have had to traverse an ocean. But I believe my dad believes that it was. Most likely it was a very similar make or model and the sight of it just surprised him and sent him west. Someone pointed out it should have been reported just in case. I have absolutely no doubts that he did, but he's in his 70s now, so I don't intend on asking. I guess if you're ever up in the cliffs of the Isle of Skye, just keep your eyes peeled for a big beige fridge. It wasn't what I saw. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, my dog got very agitated around a certain part of a trail and alternated between barking and snarling and hiding behind my legs. It creeped me out enough that we hurried out of there fast. This wasn't on a hike, and this is pretty tame compared to some of these stories, but it's a bit similar. Back in our old place, one night my girlfriend and I were walking our dogs around the neighborhood. She's a lot smaller, so I was walking two of the dogs and she was walking one, who was a former service dog. He was a real gentle dog, albeit a bit older. Other than snatching the ball away from the others during fetch, he'd never shown a bit of aggression. I walk a bit ahead of my girlfriend because of the two dogs pulling pretty hard on me, but not too far, maybe 10 or 15 feet ahead, but around a corner. As I found out later, she'd slowed down in part because she noticed someone nearby acting strangely, scoping out a house I think. When he spotted her, he said hi and she responded in kind, asked how he was. Before he could answer, the dog she was walking started to growl and she apologized, commenting that he was a guard dog. The guy looked at her and said, "Well, he's doing a good job tonight." She was pretty spooked and hurried to catch up to me. We were more careful on nighttime walks from then on. Not super scary, but was camping with a few buddies once pretty far out in a sort of sand dune type terrain in Australia. The plan was to just hike to a good spot we knew well and get drunk. We got to the spot and pitched tents and were chilling. Our spot is on top of a really high dune because the view from the top was just mesmerizing with the ocean and wilderness. Anyways, we just got the campfire started and out of nowhere this geek just comes flying over the lip of this hill right next to us and almost crushes a few friends of mine and one of the tents. Like I said, this sand dune is really high up, so I have no idea how they managed to get up it at the speed they did. They slammed the brakes and no one can get a look at them as the windows were tinted and sped off over the dunes. That was more chaotic and random, but the creepy part was about an hour later I went off to do a piss in a bush nearby and was looking down the hill and just saw a figure staring up at me. Friend of mine came behind me to piss in a bush next to me and scared the shit out of me. When I pointed the figure out to my mate, it just took off over a lip of a hill. Definitely a night I won't forget, and I don't think I've returned to that spot since. Edit. I should have added all this was at nighttime. Edit 2. Cannot believe I missed out this part. But this occurred around 3 years ago, and about 2 months ago human remains were found right next to our spot. Scary it goes on in those dunes, I tell you. A couple coyotes eating dead snakes in the middle of the trail. I drove to a park to go hiking at night in the mountains. So safe I know, and I hadn't even turned off my car and I already feel like I'm being watched. There weren't any cars around, so I thought maybe it was just me being paranoid for some reason. But for some reason I look to my right and I see this weird looking humanoid shape on top of the little bump hill about 50 feet away. At first I thought it was a weirdly shaped tree until I saw the arms move. No wind at all. So now I know there's a person staring at my car trying not to move. For what I assume is for me to get out of my car and leave to a more secluded area as we were next to the road. Of course I left. I don't go hiking at night in that particular park anymore. Edit. Oh wow, I've never received so many upvotes before. I'm very grateful for all the upvotes. Edit. Oh my god, it broke 2k upvotes. I can't express how happy I am and how grateful I am to everyone who upvoted my comment. This is actually the most upvoted liked comment and or post I've ever received in any of my social media. I do not know how to express my gratitude. Thank you all so much. 2 cubs and no mother. In other words, I had probably come between them. I was out taking my dog on a short walk and to go to the bathroom. She was a rescue and was at this point terrified of everything. So getting her outside was always a task. It was 4 AM and she was whining at me. I figured she needed to go to the bathroom, so I put on some shoes and took her outside. It was a warm night as it was July in Missouri. I'm walking down the street from my apartment complex and I see a figure standing under a street light. Not moving. Thinking it was just a guy out for an early morning run. I kept walking. That's when this figure started to move towards me in a weird fashion. He wasn't jogging. Wasn't walking. It looked like skipping. Thinking to myself, what the duck. I stopped walking. That's when my dog started growling from behind my legs. I'd had her almost 6 months and had never heard her growl or bark. I turned around and walked back into my complex. I looked over my shoulder and this dude is standing at the entrance to my apartment complex. Head to toe in black clothing. Grinning from ear to ear. I was fully in what the duck is this bullet mode and walked back into the complex further while checking to make sure Smiles wasn't following me. I started to walk towards my entrance and he turned and slipped away into the night. I went and talked to my landlord the next day and she told me they'd had multiple reports of this guy skipping around the complex late at night, but whenever the cops showed up he was gone. It was around midnight in a clearing for picnics in a large park that lots of people hike through. Pitch black. No one around. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We got pretty frisky at one of the picnic tables. And I'm facing a river which is sort of illuminated from the moonlight. He's facing the solid black tree line. We're trying to have a good time and he becomes completely still and in a low voice says, "If there's a man coming towards us." I turn my head. See only a white t-shirt approaching us at a brisk walking pace from the trees. And that's all I needed to see. I ran, knowing my BF would catch up. He did. I was never down for midnight forest stuff again. Haha. Edit. The man in the white shirt probably got within 25 feet of us by the time I had my it together enough to bolt. Still freaks me out. He said nothing, just walked very fast towards us. Neither of us looked back. Done tons of miles by headlamp. Creepiest thing I ever saw was just deer's eyes reflecting at me out of the darkness. Spooked tons of skunks, bears, and other animals. And the damn quail that wait until you are right on top of them and then all freak out at once. Got woken up miles into the backcountry once by what I thought was a car horn. But it was just a flock of geese flying overhead. And walking through a cattle herd in the dark can be freaky, especially if you don't realize you are walking through a cattle herd. I walk at night in my rural area regularly. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, bobcats, angry deer, and everything on down, with no real concern. But the creepiest encounter was a little black pickup truck with rainbow and unicorn stickers, bubblegum pop music blaring, and it smelled like cotton candy when it passed me. First time it passed me it swerved to hit me. I jumped out of the way easily. I thought nothing of it really, just figured they were startled by seeing me at night with my reflective gear. The truck circled back and comes at me again. I saw it coming this time and grabbed my dog up just in time to jump into a ditch. I heard little girl laughter, high-pitched and maniacal. The tiny truck circled back for a third go at me, but by then I was hiding in my neighbor's shrubbery. I watched it slowly drive down the road, hearing giggling as it passed me. Fortunately it kept on going and I made it home just fine. Yellowstone National Park in October of 2015. I'm kind of an avid amateur photographer, and one night around 4 AM I was out alone in the Firehole Basin region of the park. The goal was to take a long exposure photo of a geyser erupting, with the Milky Way stretching through the sky overhead. The photo turned out to be pretty much a bust. When geysers erupt they blow massive amounts of steam into the air, and steam kind of blurs that whole beautiful night sky situation. But anyway, I parked my car and hiked a ways to get close to the geyser I wanted to photograph. Then I set up my tripod, adjusted all the settings, and waited for the eventual eruption. The night was crystal clear, perfectly quiet, and very cold. As my ears grew accustomed to the lack of sound, I gradually realized I could hear the gentle burbling of the spring that gives birth to the Firehole River. Some distance behind me, I could hear wind in the trees and leaves rustling across the ground. In front of me, I could hear rumbling and hissing from deep within the earth, as the White Dome geyser worked itself up for another inevitable eruption. An owl hooted somewhere above me, and I could even hear the distant howls of wolves across the bowl of the Midway Valley below. As my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I could see the Milky Way stretched like a river of light from horizon to horizon overhead. A million, billion stars shined above, brilliant and cold. Orion hung over my right shoulder, and Venus burned just above the horizon, so bright it almost hurt to look directly at it. And then behind me, loud and sudden, the pounding footsteps of a giant, clearly coming right at me. Bear? Bigfoot? Some hideous monster, born in the hull of a geyser's boiling mouth, spewed upon the land to wreak vengeance? I didn't know, but I knew it was coming, and I knew it was close. The buffalo actually brushed against me as he went past. I was frozen in place, resigned to my fate. A huge bull, a mountain of fur and horns, shambling up out of the darkness, steam billowing from his nostrils in the cold, dry air. It felt like a close encounter with a freight train. He strode past like I didn't exist, seemed to tiptoe gently around my tripod, then stopped about 10 feet in front of me and took a long, slow, very satisfying, steaming piss on the ground. Then he grunted and went on his way, and I stood there wondering how I was going to take a photo. If the geyser blew before my hands stopped shaking. Edit. I dug around a little and found the photo I ended up with that evening when the geyser finally got around to erupting. Like I said, the steam pretty much scrambled the starfield, but I caught a lucky break with the shooting star. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. I'm glad you enjoyed the story.